So, hello everyone, good day, lovely to see you. Known faces, new faces, so happy to be here in this very fashionable and modern place. So, welcome to our panel. All three of you, I believe, are very familiar to people, but anyways, would you be kind enough to introduce yourselves? So, Peter Paul, please.
Thank you, Birgitte. Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Paul. I'm the Managing Director of the Netherlands Online Gambling Association, Trade Association for Online Gambling Operators.
Good morning. Fedor Meerts. I'm the Head of the Department at the Ministry of Justice, responsible for gambling policy since December. Before that, I was head of the COVID department.
Björn Fuchs, Chief Digital Officer at the Janshen-Hahnraths Group, owner of Fair Play, Casino Online and land-based, and also a board member of trade organization VNL-NOGA.
And myself, just a remark, I was listening very closely to the Danish and figures and numbers here. I realized I got out in time. so I was a regulator there since 2008 until 2 years ago. So yeah, it's a bit scary to see how advertising and marketing limits and so forth can influence, obviously also together with tax rate changes. So we're here to talk about future advertising changes that might happen here in Holland. And of course, Fedor, you must know something that we would love to hear about. So what do you know? I mean, what is the political perception right now? I mean, what do they not like? What do they think is working fine? What are they going to change?
Thanks. Yes, there are some things I know, and I will try to share as many as I can with you here today, because we also want to be open and transparent about this as far as this is possible. As we've seen, of course, in society, politically, also, of course, a lot in the media, we've had quite a reaction since October, basically, since the market opened. We opened the market with, well, it's, I would say, a liberal regime in some senses. It's not liberal in the sense that player protection, we have a lot of rules. Also for advertisement, marketing, there's quite a few rules. But it's liberal in how many rules there are that tell you exactly what to do. And we've seen quite a public backlash on that. We've seen also a lot of self-regulation since then, and we've seen a lot of political motion, basically motions in Parliament that we have to deal with. So what we are now working on, and what we've done already, of course, is we've seen that the use of role models. We had a very complicated legislation on that, with years and percentages and things like that. That clearly did not work. So we decided to make that much more simple.
What didn't work about it? What was wrong?
So the idea was it's okay to use role models as long as they're not appealing to people under 24.
Right.
Which is very difficult to say, of course, because if you have an old football player who just stopped football like 5 years ago, who played in the World Cups, who was a big public face, that's still someone that is a role model and appealing to a lot of people. Maybe shouldn't be in some senses, but is. So what we've done is we've actually just banned the use of role models since 30. Well, it will enter into force 30 June. So that was step one, and we're now working on step two, which is much more complicated because we have a government, we have a parliament motion on that, is to see restrictions for basically untargeted advertisement. And what I can tell you, at least, is the planning, what we're working with, and that is that we're working to bring a proposal into consultation and also into Parliament before the summer, as was already said.
So that would be in 3 advertising.
Weeks. Yeah.
What exactly would that be? Could you give an example?
I think you can already find an example in the self-regulation that the sector has done over the last months, that the NOGA and the VNL-NOGA have done. There are a few spheres in which you cannot control who sees your message. That's, well, notoriously, of course, outside in public space, on radio, also on television, of course. Those are spheres in which you may be able to limit the amount of people that you reach under 24. But for instance, for a football game, you can still have 300,000 people under that age, or probably even more. 300,000 people even under the age of 18, probably, watching those advertisements. which is different, for instance, in the online sphere, where you have many more options to target, of course. So that's something we're looking into. That's one of our dilemmas. Huh? What is untargeted and what is targeted, and also how does that work with privacy regulations? The second is how do you make a distinction? Can you make a distinction between land-based and online providers? Yeah. And the third main one is how do we deal with sponsoring? Sponsoring in itself is extremely untargeted, of course, but it is a different kind of advertisement.
So there's a lot of dilemmas there, right? It's a balance at all times.
Yeah.
So you can't just ban everything at all times, right? I mean, you will ultimately damage
exactly.
the market as well if you don't take care. Right?
Exactly. So we have three. I mean, most countries have the same. We have three main policy goals, and that's first of all the protection of consumers. Second of all, the prevention of addiction, which you can also say is protection of consumers. Yeah. And the third is, of course, to make sure that there's as less as possible illegal activities such as money laundering. And that also depends on bringing players into the legal regime, like we've seen in the previous presentation, onshore, offshore. You can have different terms for it, of course, and that's a balance. And if you go too far in restrictions, also for instance with bonuses, it may be less appealing for consumers, and that is a balance. And as you've also seen in the previous presentation, we don't really know where the tipping point is.
Right, right.
And in every country it's different, because every culture is different.
So, of course, we would all like to know a little bit about timelines. So can you reveal anything about when would this happen, those changes? And
well, I mean, realistically, if we're bringing things now into consultation into Parliament, that means we will need this year to go through the motions. Mm-hmm. Earliest beginning of next year. Right.
And thoughts, Peter Paul, on what we just listened to?
Well, in general, we're not very enthusiastic about advertising bans, and also not this advertising ban, although it seems to allow for advertising which is targeted, which is a small win. Yeah, so for NOGA and its members, it's important that we can fulfill the legal obligation that every license holder has, which is to protect consumers, and you protect consumers by channeling them to the legal offer. And what really stood out to me in the previous presentation is that without giving consumers that also watch television an idea of who a licensed operator is, channeling becomes a lot harder. Also untargeted advertising, I think, plays a bigger role than members of Parliament seem to recognize, unfortunately.
So that's you're saying in a very polite way that they don't know what they're doing.
Well, I've been taught that Parliament is always right, and I'm sure that those people know what they are doing. But they seem to be forgetful or forgetting that consumer protection is the prime objective of the legal system that we made in the Netherlands. And advertising in television, especially in an opening nascent market, I think is the word, plays a very important role in, for consumers to recognize who is a licensed operator and who is not. Because if we leave it to the internet, players go online and go to Google and type in online gokkast, which is Dutch for online slot machine. And a good deal of, or a bad deal of the hits that they get is paid for advertising by illegal operators. So the legal operators are competing with the illegal market online. And if you then ask them politely to stop advertising on television, you're putting them on the back foot. Why would you do that?
So you're not a strong believer and supporter of what is coming up?
Well, I know that the Parliament asked government to do this in a majority, and that's the way it works in a democracy. But yeah, it doesn't stop me from reminding MPs that they should look at consumer protection first and foremost, rather than irritation, which seems to be the big thing that we're trying to prevent.
So Björn, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have to concur with the gentleman on my right, because as Justin said this morning, if ideology and opinions start to rule, facts are on the downside of the equation. And in this case, from my former career in media, I know that positive headlines don't sell newspapers. So, of course, when the market opens and something new comes in, the negative will prevail. And if we can add the facts, and if we can add a bit of balance, both on restraint from operators as in the political arena, I think we would have a solid way forward for the future. But banning things at this point, of course, would be a grave mistake.
So, you know, there's always two sides of this, right? So could one argue that the industry have now had considerable time really to get it right and to show that they care? And we heard, I think, quite clear from the regulator today that it's a very important issue to talk about duty of care and really show that in everything you do as an operator. So have industry failed in doing that since Parliament know what they're doing and want to make some changes here?
There are two things in there, in that remark. First of all, I think the word fail is a rather large word.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wake you up.
Because, again, missed opportunities, as said earlier this morning, would be a better statement. And of course, there are some operators that have gone full throttle and crossed the lines, and in Formula One would have had a black flag with an orange dot for the ones who follow and watch Formula One. On the other hand, we have to be aware within that remark that it isn't just about advertisement volume. It's also about content. It's also about duty of care. It's the entire system that has to work. So there is a challenge there, and we still have a long way to go forward.
Yeah.
So you could also argue, perhaps, now we talked also and listened a little bit about in the former discussion about norms and that you actually have to figure out yourself, partly, what is expected of you. So could one argue on the other side that there are too many norms and they're too complicated, or it's not that easy to figure out what government everybody expects of the operators? Do you have an excuse here?
I think it's pretty clear what the norms are. And when it comes to advertising, I think, in part, it's a missed opportunity, like, was already stated this morning. We've tried to come up with a system of advertising volume control, and we failed, and that's something that I, personally see as a defeat, a personal defeat. But having said that, it on the other hand is not so strange. What do you expect if you open a highly competitive market, highly anticipated market? What do you expect operators to do? They go into cutthroat competition. You get a bang at the start of the market. So if the legislator thinks that they don't have to restrict that advertising boom, then don't act surprised when it happens. And that's kind of what happened. But when it comes to duty of care, I think operators should really pick up the glove here and show the legislator and show the regulator that they mean business when it comes to consumer protection. It should really stand out that in the legalized market, consumers are really protected, because if they're not, what is the whole point of the legislative system?
So Fedor, is it actually too much to expect from industry that they should be sort of like the perfect everything? I mean, they're there in a very aggressive, quite new market that have been longed for so many years, and they're just finding their way into this. So can they really be expected to be ethical, morally perfect at this stage? Is that too much to expect?
Well, I think what we did do, and that's also what Peter Paul just referred to, I think we underestimated the market opening. This law, and you probably know the background of it. It took almost 10 years, a lot of maneuvering between parties, and at some point, I think that was like 2019. It was okay. Don't touch it anymore, because if you touch anything and change anything, then the whole thing will collapse. And that was basically, I think, the feeling. So in doing that, I think we underestimated the preparations we needed to do, and of course it's been reminded and it's been said many times also by the regulatory authority. You need to get self-regulation into place, because otherwise you're going to have too much, too abundant advertisement, and there's going to be a backlash. Yeah. It's been said for many years, it's been repeated for many years, and I know there have been attempts by industry to come up with regulatory code. But that came, of course, the first version of that in December, which was, especially also in public opinion, too late to actually effectively do something.
So one could perhaps, because Fedor, you touch upon the fact that, and as Justin said earlier today also, I mean, we have all been waiting for this regulation to actually take place. And it could perhaps be argued that what was thought way back when the process started, quite naturally, will need to be adjusted already, right? Yeah. Somehow. So it's old and young at the same time.
No, but it's also, I mean, this legislation has, I think, many progressive pieces in, especially when it comes to player protection. But also, I mean, the climate in many countries, actually, since 2011 has changed a lot. Yeah. I think that if you also look, for instance, in Parliament, the big political parties which were still ruling then are now, some of them are very small, and the landscape has changed very much.
So Björn, data. Do we actually base all these things that are going to happen? Do you think they're based on data and facts and research?
Not yet enough. I think there's a large room for improvement there, and especially when we look at the cure and the issue that we're trying to cure, because at this point an issue with advertisement volume for the online ecosystem has been elevated to high risk games of chance in total. So we have to be aware that when we lift the solution to a higher level, what the impact will be, because it will be more severe for different verticals.
Right. So final words on, now we talk about the future. So future advertising. So Peter Paul, how do you see that play out? What would you like to see happening and not?
Well, self-restraint is probably a key word, whilst it still makes a difference. You know, the earliest time this decree will come into force will be the 1st of January. Under the circumstances, it remains very, very important also for new entrants who have not been allowed onto the market, that they can let the consumer know that they are there, and preferably, I say, through, let's say, the old-fashioned broadcasting channels, because, you know, I've been explained this by marketeers. The first time that a consumer recognizes a brand is because he has seen it in the public sphere, on television or on the radio, and they go, I know this brand, you know. So it's recognizable, and then it's trusted. So I hope that the industry can show that any further restrictions, let's put it that way, are unnecessary.
Björn.
Two things, I think. Balance in legislation, but also in the choices that existing operators and the new ones make. And unification. You know, we have to be on the same page as an industry. We have to be on the same page as operators. And of course, we're highly competitive, and it's always a good thing to have an open market and welcome new operators on the market. But again, it's about choices. At Janshen-Hahnraths, we made the choice in 2021 to cap the amount of hours. I was criticized in an interview who the age I was to decide that for the player. And again, this player is getting acquainted with this industry, either because they're regular players or new players, but they have to be able to see which brands are out there. And there are certain age brackets that are highly dependent on the above-the-line media. And building a brand is about above the line and below the line. So if there's a balance in that, we have a solid future ahead of us.
So you get the last word, Fedor, because you had the first. So what would be your hopes and expectations for future advertising?
It's always what my wife accuses me of. No, I'd like also to resonate what I just heard. I think it is crucial that next to the things that we are developing now, to show actually that maybe they are not necessary. I mean, that would be, of course, be the best. So the path that's been taken now when it comes to self-regulation on marketing, but also the path that still needs to be taken, I think, for a very large part in a related issue, when it comes to player protection, when it comes to duty of care, which I heard, well, I saw the speech, but I didn't hear it, sadly. René gave a very convincing speech about. On those two fields, that's where we need to show that it was worth it to legalize this market in this way.
Right. Right. So let's hope it was worth it. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please stay for a moment, because again we have a question. We have a minute for a quick question. Very knowledgeable panel here. Any takers? No questions today. That's a shame. I have a question though. To any of the panelists here. Do you think that Parliament will be simply happy if gambling becomes less visible, regardless of the consequences, such as lower marketing channeling rates? Any opinions?
It will be a short, sweet taste, because if it is completely invisible, channelization will go down. And I think the consequences of such a situation are severe.
So not desired. Anything to add?
Well, I fear the same. Yeah, I fear the same.
Great. So we all agree with it. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much.